Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and today I'm flying solo, hosting the show by my lonesome. My brother from another mother, Brian E. Roach, is, and I have the air quotes up in the air, on assignment. So Brian and I were going to continue the entire looking at the AFC North depth charts to see, which teams may have improved. And, of course, there's one of those remaining, and that's the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to catch up with that next week, and it should be interesting because there's already reports coming out of, if you're not aware, the Baltimore Ravens have already reported to and have begun their training camp for the 2018 season. And there's already players that are getting dinged up. But sometimes that stuff can be, it's blown out of proportion. It's just like, reporting on these guys practicing in T-shirts and shorts. So try to take some of that with a grain of salt. I won't even mention it here. I'm going to bump that with some more Le'Veon Bell talk because it just seems more appropriate at the moment as the internet's on fire and can't decide whether to love or hate the man. I'm not going to really get into the contract or financial terms that Brian talked to. There's a little bit of overlap just because he went solo. Now I'm going solo. Terry will also be back with her Steelers bars stuff with wherever you can go anywhere in the country and watch these Steelers games, the Steelers Nation Across the Nation series. So look for that next week, as well as hopefully some training camp coverage here as the Steelers report next Wednesday and get things underway on Thursday. Steel City Underground will be in attendance at quite a few of these practices this season. So we'll have a lot of good stuff to discuss there, as well as football starts ramping up here. Don't forget about the Steelers preview guide that myself and Tina Rivers wrote. You can find that on Kindle, Barnes & Noble, and the Apple iBooks app. As well as we've got some other interesting developments going on here that I cannot wait to discuss with some of you folks, aside from the hashtag HelmetWorthy. Some of those videos you may have seen up on our social media throughout the week. Thank you, everyone who has so far been selected and won. Thank Brian in particular and our anonymous person that I won't name for the suggestion, et cetera, and getting involved in, kind of kickstarting this whole thing. These videos have been great. It's fun seeing some of these submissions. Can't wait to get some more. So don't forget to throw your name in the hat as well. And I talked about some other exciting developments. If you happen to be part of a business or a brand in whatever capacity of decision making and would like to be a sponsor of Steel City Underground, whether it be this on-demand radio program or over on our website, feel free to tap or click on the steelcityunderground.com/contact or find contact just under our website and shoot us a message. We've got a couple of things coming in, and I cannot wait to begin discussing those with you in the coming weeks. So always an opportunity there as well. But today, I want to talk about Le'Veon Bell. I did a lot of talking about this in writing on the website. It's a lot easier to put this through my long-winded voice here on the podcast today. And there's really three prongs to this because, as we know, it's already pricey to franchise tag Le'Veon Bell, correct? Just like the Kirk Cousins thing that was going on in Washington, I just loathe, not love, loathe. Like, it frustrates me that people are making a comparison of Cousins with Bell. Okay, they are for all intents and purposes, top players. I think Bell is regarded as being one of the best running backs, where Cousins, I can't put him in a top 5. It's difficult for me to put him in a top 10, but I could fit or ease him in there with some justification, at least a top 12 quarterback in the NFL, right? And anything that's in that category is better than what you're going to find. That's the reason why he got the big payday he did. But it was very expensive for the Redskins to continue on with the franchise tag, and he wanted the payday that he got, rightfully deserved or not. We'll see how that works out with the Minnesota Vikings. But with Bell, it looks like this is another year where he's going to sit out camp. He's going to sit out the preseason. He's going to wait right up till the regular season. He's going to train on his own. That seemed to work out okay, with the exception of the cohesion with his fellow offensive teammates. We know it was a slow start last year to his season. We know that the expectations last year didn't necessarily rise to where they needed to be. There were times where he was just lights out, best player, period. I mean, just look at some of the passes he caught, even in the playoff loss to the Jaguars. Everyone could remember the stiff arm on Drake Kirkpatrick, or tiptoeing and avoiding how many defenders. He's an elusive back. He's a special talent. He's one of a kind. I will speak him up for days. However, there is something, this is the reason I didn't explain why it frustrates me, the comparison with Cousins. This is where it's at. Quarterbacks play longer in the NFL. Quarterbacks get hit. But when you're talking about a quarterback, I mean, the ceiling, the high end, 50 times over 16 games in a year, and then maybe the postseason. I mean, you got to be getting sacked quite a bit in each game. There were spells where Ben Roethlisberger didn't go down for 2-3 games at a time last year due to how well the Steelers' offensive line plays, and that's another factor I'll be getting into here in a moment. But quarterbacks hit a lot less. I mean, running backs, this is your job, is to hit or be hit. I mean, even wide receivers, I mean, do they really play far into their 30s? Maybe. I know Terrell Owens is trying to play in the Canadian Football League at like 55 or something. That's not his real age. I'm just teasing. He's in his 40s. And I mean, there are people in stellar athletic condition. I mean, like, look at Tom Brady. There's jokes about him, what he does in order to stay in shape. James Harrison, obviously, for many years, played much longer than anyone would have expected as a linebacker. But, wide receivers aren't, basically, if you're getting 400 touches a year, you're getting tackled maybe 400 times. I mean, this is why guys run out of bounds now. I mean, you used to have the old smash mouth style where, I don't know, and just name a back where they would just go and hit into you for a few extra yards. That's not the way it works anymore. These guys still want to earn a paycheck for as long as they can. And offering Le'Veon Bell a deal in the neighborhood of something like 5 years, $70 million, puts him north of 30 years old by and far, probably into the type of category where you're going to add another running back like the Steelers did with Jerome Bettis and Willie Parker during that 2005 Super Bowl year, the last of Bettis's career, where Bettis was well north of 30 as well. It just takes a pounding on you. It's a different type of position. And I don't know. I don't have to harp on that too much more. You could see where I'm getting at. You just look at somebody like DeMarco Murray, who just walked away from the game. He made his money, but what happened with DeMarco when he left the Dallas Cowboys? I mean, his best years, the Dallas Cowboys put together a fantastic offensive line. They had Tony Romo as their quarterback for the most part, and Des Bryant, and you know what? I'm trying to think if Miles Austin may have been there too. But regardless, what I'm trying to say is there were other playmakers around DeMarco Murray, and then he goes to Tennessee, and they realized they had to draft somebody else because it was kind of starting to, it was starting to diminish. The return was not there that the team may have thought for the amount of money they were paying for, and that's where it's very difficult when you see 5 years, $70 million. And it looks like the first 3 years of that contract would have paid Bell $45 million, so about roughly $15 million a piece per year over those first 3 years, and 33 over the first two, in fact. But it was the thought of having something guaranteed that, as Brian mentioned, the Steelers don't do that. That's not what they do. It's 1 year, they guarantee, but they're they're of their word. The Rooneys, they back up what they put down. They put their money where their mouth is, and there aren't guys who've left Pittsburgh one way or another that really haven't been paid. And you even look at the Antonio Brown situation a few years ago, and Antonio avoided this. This wasn't something where he had rap songs. This is where Le'Veon Bell gets the flack that Antonio Brown was like Teflon, because he avoided saying anything about it on social media. Like I said, the rap music, the leaks of whatever the agents are saying and things of that nature. And it was swirling around AB, and it looked like the team kicked forward some extra money because he was producing one, two, or three top receivers in the NFL over that period of time. And then he got the new contract and is making a lot of money. Now, I understand a few things here. I understand there are guys like Sammy Watkins and Brandon Cooks making an obscene amount of money as wide receivers who really haven't done much of anything, specifically Watkins. Cooks, you're expecting Cooks to maybe be what we thought Martavis Bryant would be with the Rams. That's what they're betting on, and they're betting a lot of money that's going to work that way. I guess, the athleticism and, having worked with Drew Brees and Tom Brady over the last few seasons may help that. That's going to help Bell if he hits the free agent market too, but I don't want people to freak out and think that maybe, there isn't a life after Le'Veon Bell. There are potential replacements, maybe even perhaps already on the roster or looking down the road. Now, a few things here. If Bell doesn't sign his franchise tag, the Steelers can't trade him. Number two, for what the Steelers would be trading him for at what his franchise tag is paying this year versus what a team has in salary cap money available to have a 1-year rental of a very expensive luxury running back. Maybe they have hopes of extending that Jimmy Graham. What was Jimmy Graham? A second-round pick from the 49ers? That's all the Patriots got. So don't have these grand illusions of getting something spectacular if the Steelers were to make that move, which would only potentially weaken their football team because, I said that the replacements may already be on the roster. Do you want to just go with those replacements and weaken your team without having Bell, or go with Bell and see how it goes for this season? That's the way I would look at it. So a trade, probably not going to happen. For another reason, too, if he walks in free agency next year, the Steelers will get it. He's going to be one of the top, if not the top, valued free agent on the market. They will get one of the top compensatory picks. It will be a third rounder for Le'Veon Bell, provided the Steelers, who never really opened their wallet in free agency, just remain status quo and don't have however that formula works. It's like the Colonel's secret recipe or whatever. With the compensatory picks, the Steelers will get one. They have that in mind. That would be a 2019 compensatory pick. So it wouldn't be in 2018 because 2018 would be when not 2019. 2019 is when Bell would be a free agent. 2020 compensatory pick. So you're looking at maybe a year without Bell. Maybe they have a free agent. Maybe they roll with James Conner. We're going to see what fifth-round pick Jalen Samuels has to offer. Stephen Ridley is a veteran, but he's heading towards that 30-year-old mark as well. But that was very successful for D'Angelo Williams when D'Angelo Williams was only splitting time. And I know Mr. Brian E. Roach mentioned this on his solo show, but that's the one reason you got to have a lot of optimism into looking at life without Le'Veon Bell, because Le'Veon Bell was hurt, and we all panicked when he wasn't around, and the Steelers had to play with Jordan Todman and Fitz Toussaint, but they still steamrolled the Cincinnati Bengals in that wild card game. Now, I know there were other mitigating factors that made that game a mess. Ben got hurt. Just perfect laid on him like a UFC fighter, kneeing him on the ground, and Landry Jones turned the ball over, and then Ryan Shazier saved the day, and all these other things, and penalties with Pac-Man Jones and Burfict and Boswell kicking the field goal, but they were still successful running the football against the Bengals. It was over 125 yards total between Todman and Toussaint. Who are those guys? They're like practice squad guys, okay? Behind a great, maybe even better than great, maybe even elite to some extent, offensive line in the National Football League. You got a guy who's considered elite definitely in David DeCastro. Marcus Gilbert is always borderline talk of Pro Bowl / All-Pro. Marquise Pouncey has always been in those discussions. And then you got the left side of the line with two guys who entered the league undrafted and have made a very good niche for themselves. Alejandro Villanueva, an Iron Man that doesn't miss any time. Ramon Foster's been a great guard. The Steelers still have guys in reserve that are capable as well, like B.J. Finney. So when you remove Bell from that type of situation, I can't say necessarily he'll be as successful with another team. It all depends on where he goes. But in his place, I believe someone else could be successful. And the Steelers are going to find that out because there's going to be more reps, just like last year during training camp for a James Conner, for a Jalen Samuels, for Stephen Ridley. Fitz Toussaint still on the roster. They got some other guys that are developmental type players as well that were undrafted free agents, future contract type players that they signed that are they're gonna have an opportunity to show everyone what they've got, and the Steelers will have this opportunity for this season to know what they've got. It doesn't mean that any of these players are going to touch the ball. If Le'Veon Bell signs his tender and is on the field, they may get more touches in week 1 or week 2 as he assimilates himself back into the system. But after that, I mean, he's the workhorse. He's the every down back. But not every team operates with this every down back type mentality. And in fact, this is one of the things that makes it very difficult on what type of dollar value to place on Bell. Some people were saying that, he's asking for $17 million. I mean, it's far and above what Devonta Freeman with the Atlanta Falcons is going to make. His base salary is a little over $8 million for this season. And we've seen the Atlanta Falcons, they don't just, hand the ball off or throw the ball to Freeman all the time. I mean, his numbers aren't as extravagant as Le'Veon Bell. He doesn't have all of these 100-yard rushing games. That's because Tevin Coleman is also splitting time in that backfield as well. And this running back by committee thing is something that has worked for the last few teams that have appeared in the Super Bowl. Now, I understand the previous year where Atlanta had Freeman and Coleman, and they had them really on the cheap. And if you look at it even now, it's still super dirt cheap as far as these contracts are concerned. I'll be getting to that in a second as well. But you kind of look at this, and you're like, well, they've got two guys that are like less than half of Le'Veon Bell, who's making like about $14 to $14.5 million on the franchise tag. And you're just like, well, okay, the Falcons. Well, the Patriots too. I mean, they had LeGarrette Blount. Yeah, he ran for over 1,000 yards in that year that they beat the Falcons when they came back, the overtime game, blah, 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 and he had a boatload of touchdowns. They were only 2 touchdowns shy last year when they had like this, I don't know, is it a quintet? How many running backs do they have? Hold on, let me pause 1 second, okay? Not literally don't pause, but just pause and think of this. For those of you who play fantasy football, do you put a New England Patriots running back on your roster? No, you don't, because you never know who's going to get the rock from week to week. It could be anybody. It could be James White. It could be Mike Gillislee. It could be Rex Burkhead. Deion Lewis is gone from there now, but he was the guy last year. This year, Jeremy Hill might be filling that role. It is a committee. You go and look at the Philadelphia Eagles, where Blount ended up going last year. They win the Super Bowl against the Patriots, who had their own committee, and they traded. They got Jay Ajayi. They had Blount. They had Corey Clement. Darren Sproles got hurt, but he was around at the beginning of the season. Wendell Smallwood is another guy. And then they went and drafted another running back too. And speaking of which, these teams, I mean, you got very few teams that have this far and above a big-time player like a Todd Gurley or Ezekiel Elliott. Even the Carolina Panthers, they had Christian McCaffrey. They had Jonathan Stewart. They were splitting time over these players. And McCaffrey's on a rookie contract, so he's not making a whole lot of money. Stewart's out of there now, so it may be more of just the one guy type thing. They still have Curtis Samuel, who, they were flirting with whatever position he might play. Who knows if he sees more time. They had a guy that was always a practice squad guy, like Cameron Artis-Payne in their backfield. So there's, even from the fantasy perspective, when you're looking at all of these rosters and who you can draft, look at the New Orleans Saints. Here's a perfect example too. Mark Ingram, who, yes, he's suspended. Trying to think who else they just added. I was just looking. It was one of the former Ravens, Terrence West is who it is. That will be there. But they drafted Alvin Kamara last year. You look at the Chiefs. They drafted Kareem Kareem Hunt, he was third on the depth chart, and then all these other guys started getting hurt. Spencer Ware got hurt, and he was the guy who took over for Jamal Charles, along with Charkandrick West. Have a hard time saying that. But look what Hunt did. You look at, Donta Foreman down with the Texans. All these guys got hurt, which kind of sucks. I was going to say Delvin Cook as well with the Vikings, where Jerick McKinnon goes to the 49ers on some big deal. But anyways, all of these teams have been spreading the love around, and they haven't been spending nearly, not even close to $8 million in these cases. Look at the Arizona Cardinals, for example. They have just been moving full sail with David Johnson in their backfield. Now, he's going to be returning from an injury, but he was like a third-round pick as well. A lot of these guys going in the third and fourth round, some second-rounders, not too many first-round draft picks as it would stand. So just to give you an idea of what Devonta Freeman from the Atlanta Falcons is going to make this season, he has a base salary that's 8.2, but it's an average salary of 8.2, but the base is only $2 million with the $5 million cap hit in 2018. So they're going to spend a little over $8 million on their running backs this season. They only spent $5.8 million in 2017 and $1.7 before Freeman signs this extension and this new deal. 1.7, not $17 million that Bell is asking for. That's just unbelievable. I mean, the Patriots got $9.4 million invested in all of their running backs so far, and this is according to Spot Track, which oftentimes is not the most reputable site, so take it with a grain of salt where I'm getting some of these figures, but they're close. They're at least a ballpark idea. I already mentioned the Falcons with $8 million. The Saints, the guys I mentioned, $9.5 million. That's because they gave Ingram a new deal as well. And then the Chiefs, $8 million. I mean, this is just, and they just signed, trying to think, Kerwin Williams to put in that kind of rotation and see who's going to make it out of camp of this depth chart. The Steelers used to do this too, by the way. I mentioned Willie Parker earlier, splitting time with Jerome Bettis. Well, Willie Parker was the Bill Cow in 2008, sort of, kind of. Mewelde Moore was the leading receiving kind of third down back, and he got quite a few yards too, because I think Willie was somewhere around 700 to 800 in the ballpark of, and Mewelde Moore, off the top of my head, had a little over 500, maybe 600, but he caught up like 45 passes. We're talking about Mewelde Moore, okay? I loved Mewelde Moore. This isn't to put Mewelde Moore down whatsoever, but the Steelers have experience. Mike Tomlin, as a head coach, has experience with rotating through running backs. It's not unheard of. I don't want anybody to freak out and get scared if a Le'Veon Bell isn't there, because this is the trend in the NFL now. Now, Bell should be paid a lot more. He's a special player. It's like you don't want to base Rob Gronkowski's contract on all other tight ends because he's above other tight ends. He's one of a kind. I understand that, but the Steelers also have other one-of-a-kind players such as Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, and don't at me on this, Cam Hayward. And you're going to pay those guys ahead of, what you would pay for just a running back. But to have that money involved, tied up in one position, it would handicap you, would handcuff you as far as free agents or even retaining some players who could be hitting free agency. I know Shazier's on the horizon. If he makes a successful return or not, that's debatable, but you got to look at other guys down the road, and where you have tied $70 million up in 5 years. I mean, you're even talking about the lifespans here, the career, the contracts of guys like a Mason Rudolph or James Washington or Terrell Edmonds that were just taken this year, or guys previous, TJ Watt, Juju Smith-Schuster. So you got to always have that in the back of your mind. But let's talk about another player that has been successful with the Steelers over a period of time. D'Angelo Williams, in 2 seasons with the Pittsburgh Steelers, he starts 14 games. He appears in 25, barely appears in some of those other ones. Really, the ones where he was the starter is where he was in place of Bell via injury and or suspension. He racks up 1,250 yards rushing, 15 touchdowns, 58 receptions, 485 receiving yards, and also had 2 receiving touchdowns. Now, he caught 40 passes for 367 yards in 2015. That was when he started 10 games. Not nearly as much, obviously, when he only starts 4 games in 2016 before I guess he's retired. I don't know if he officially ever announced that. He's probably in good shape. Don't think he's going to be signing with the Steelers anytime soon. I mean, he was 33 years old in 2016, so he's approaching, or if he's not already, 35 right now as I look at this. But it's just to give you an idea of when you have Ben Roethlisberger, when you have Antonio Brown, when you have a great offensive line and a great offensive line coach such as Mike Munchak, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Now let's talk about some of that light at the end of the tunnel. I talked about James Conner. Looking real sharp. Year two's usually, the rookies, they don't have that grueling grind from the college, the bowl season straight into the combine and all of that stuff, and then right into, the rookie mini camps, et cetera, et cetera. And get to relax and heal up a little bit for a few months, and that usually does a body good heading into year two, especially since he was already injured. Jalen Samuels was nothing but an offensive weapon and touchdown machine during his time with NC State. He's a fifth-round pick. We'll see if he's a suitable replacement with better hands than what Connor has. Stephen Ridley, a veteran, he could pound the rock too. But you know what? Worst case scenario, that's what you're looking at in 2019 without Bell, or without Bell even in 2018, and still Toussaint somewhere there. Now, the Steelers could always look to draft someone in 2019. Like I said, very few players going in the first round of the NFL draft right now when you're talking about, just the big names, Melvin Gordon, a Todd Gurley, a Leonard Fournette, a Zeke Elliott. I mean, that's practically it, right? If I forgot someone, it was not to disparage them whatsoever. There are some flops that obviously over the last few seasons, like a Trent Richardson going number 3 overall to the Cleveland Browns. That type of thing happens too. But most of these players, I mean, even Bell wasn't the first running back taken when he was selected. What was that, 2013? The Cincinnati Bengals went and took Gio Bernard before that, and everybody was on the bandwagon to grab Eddie Lacy, who I don't even think's with the team right now. He was trying to, cut his teeth and lose some weight with the Seattle Seahawks last year, and he couldn't really even crack the lineup. He was taken right after that. So it's not always like a surefire thing, but when you see the Kamaras and the Hunts and the Cooks and the Foremans and all of these guys that come out of the draft last year, you look at some of the guys that are coming out or potentially coming out in 2019 and 2020 when, if the Steelers lose Bell, they would get that compensatory pick. It doesn't look all too bad. You see what they were able to do with Willie Parker, Mewelde Moore. You saw briefly what they could do with Jordan Tom and Toussaint. Yes, I know. Toussaint fumbles. They lose against the Broncos. They lose. And remember, AB was knocked out of that game too. They didn't have D'Angelo Williams, Le'Veon Bell. They didn't have Antonio Brown. They had to throw Sammy Coates out there. And if it wasn't for a fumble and, Marcus Wheaton catches a touchdown early in that game, who knows? He may have been talking about an AFC title appearance back then as well. So they're still contenders. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not like they're not going to be in contention without a Le'Veon. If they have to go to a committee, so be it. They'll know who these guys are on their roster. They'll know if Bell's actually worth the value he's worth. Who's to say Bell doesn't hit the free agency market next year, sniffs around, doesn't get an offer he likes, and ends up coming back to Pittsburgh because he's overvalued his own self-worth? This is a mistake. If you heard this before, there's been teases. Dre Kirkpatrick with the Bengals trying to tease the Steelers, but literally, Donta Hightower from the Patriots, the linebacker, he comes and they say, hey, if you leave here and get on the plane, the offer's revoked. And we're, it's off the table because they try and use it as leverage for their former team as well. So sometimes these guys get feelers and it's a catch and release type deal. So not necessarily the end of the world. Either way that it goes, I think the Steelers are prepared. They can, obviously try and make their effort toward bringing Bell back, or they could just try and roll with what they've got, add maybe another piece to that puzzle should the pieces that are already there not fall into place. I mean, it's a pretty interesting thing to look at. Like I said, the last 2 years, the 3 teams that were in the Super Bowl, all committees, okay? Also, the amount of money that the franchises investing in this position, not a lot to just one individual player. I know Bell is above that, but when you look at the teams that are probably available for him to go to, not that promising. I mean, what? Maybe the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how he would fare after he would maybe potentially leave. I know Buffalo Bills, somebody was saying something like that. I don't know. I mean, there's just so many teams that are running with lower-priced, younger backs. I mean, the Bengals even have Joe Mixon. Trying to think of the young man that's playing for – I'm thinking of the wrong one. I'm thinking of Langford, who kind of did – Jordan Howard with the Chicago Bears. Or, I mean, you got some that aren't working. I mean, the Packers are still trying to figure out. The Lions are still trying to figure it out. But overall, I mean, you look at Kareem Hunt, Melvin Gordon, Todd Gurley was a high pick. The Steelers could use a high pick. What if they don't have any major pressing needs? You look up and down that roster, and if they don't have to pay Bell, they're going to keep most of who they have right now intact. They could spend a high pick, a 1 or a 2 on a running back. It's not unheard of whatsoever. The Giants are going to have what? Saquon Barkley, or I mean, the Raiders are still like trying to push Marshawn Lynch out there. I don't know how much longer that's going to work for. Derrick Henry was a second-round back with the Titans. He's going to be there. And look at the Redskins. What? Chris Thompson. They have another. They have another back there. They got Samjay Perine, and they have a committee. I can't remember the third guy's name. He's actually the most important, I think, of the trio. But Thompson's more the third down back, so that can be done. But say, I was kind of hinting at where Bell can go. How's that worked out for other players? I mean, you look at Mike Wallace, he got paid, but if you look at the money he's got paid and how many times he's moved his residence since then, he's only up maybe a few $1 million. And that all depends on where he went. And don't forget, these guys pay taxes on their money too. So if the taxes are more than what it is in the state of Pennsylvania, city of Pittsburgh, whatever municipalities and states and federal income taxes and stuff that they're paying on these salaries, he may not really be that far ahead. Now, he went to Miami, so they don't have a state income tax. That probably worked out well for him. I know last check, maybe about a year ago, he was only like a couple million ahead of Antonio Brown. I think Antonio Brown, with his new contract, actually has him beat now, and he's built a legacy, Brown being who I'm talking about, with one franchise. Emmanuel Sanders has actually done well. He got a Super Bowl ring with the Denver Broncos. I know he was speculation of being maybe a cap casualty this offseason, so we'll see. Kelvin Beachum, he went to the Jaguars on a 1-year prove-it deal because, he tore up his knee. As a left tackle goes, he's still being paid pretty well with the New York Jets. He's still in the league. Believe it or not, Ziggy Hood, who was not a fantastic by all means, he actually lost his job to Cam Hayward with the Steelers. He was a former first-round pick. He's been with the Redskins for a while now, and he's still there. He's part of their defensive line rotation. You look at some other guys that have come and gone through the system. Jericho Cotchery's now a coach with the Carolina Panthers. He got a little bit older, and he carved out a niche there. There's some offensive linemen that did okay. Willie Colon, Craig Urbick, who really – he was drafted, didn't pan out with the Steelers, made a career elsewise. But you look at some of these receivers and stuff that the picks were used on, none of these guys were holding out for more money like a Marcus Wheaton or a Sammy Coates or Kobe Hamilton. But it hasn't worked out too well for them. They're bouncing around. Wheaton's still trying to stick around in the league after doing nothing with the Bears last year. You look at, guys who did make kind of a stink while they were here. Brandon Boykin, where did he go? He's pretty much out of the league. He's been hurt the last few teams he's been with. He got cut from the Panthers, went to the Bears, got hurt, went to the Ravens, also ended up on injured reserve, currently a free agent. There's draft picks that didn't work out too well also, like a Dree Archer. So, you talk about getting somebody in the third round like a James Conner. Well, Dree Archer was a third rounder too, so you can't always, say anything is a surefire pick no matter where they come from. Lawrence Timmons is the biggest one right now because he's MIA from MIA, actually. The Dolphins signed him last year. A lot of people wanted him to stay in Pittsburgh. He was Mike Tomlin's first ever first-round draft choice, and, they said c'est la vie. They went with Vince Williams, and Timmons is currently still a free agent after being released earlier this year from the Dolphins. So You know, this just kind of shows a pattern of, except for when they've gotten it wrong, players that have gotten hurt or just didn't work out, Lamar Woodley, Cortez Allen, and they tied some money into the future while their aging players were still getting paid, like a Troy Polamalu or whoever else, just name guys, James Harrison, before he, kind of retired and came back, went to the Bengals, retired, came back, blah, blah, blah. They had money tied up in some folks. And they tried to secure other parts of their future, and that didn't work, and the other guys retired, and you ended up with 8-8 seasons. So you see where the Steelers are trying to position themselves. There may be some hesitancy, but if the numbers are correct, a 5-year, $70 million deal is a sweetheart deal maybe for Le'Veon Bell. It's disappointing to see that he didn't sign it. I see what he wants to do with guaranteed money, et cetera, et cetera. I don't fault him. Don't fault the organization. We'll see how it goes. I'm not saying anything about his decline in numbers. That could be any number of reasons. Last season, he could have a phenomenal 2018, and I will fully support him as long as he's in a black and gold uniform. So love to hear your take on this whole situation. I think I've given you many angles of, there's nothing to get too extremely worried about just yet when it comes to Le'Veon Bell. So feel free to contact us, of course. The website, social media works as well, and YouTube commenters, keep them coming. Till next time, my name's Joe. Be safe, be good. We'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.